Okay, great. Thank you. We are going to start talking today in appropriations about S-17, otherwise known as the Sheriff's Bill. It's an appropriations for, if I recall. So we have the Chair of Government Office here, Senator Hardy, where the bill originated from. She has to go at 1:15. Our chair is not here, Senator Kitchell, but we're going to start so that we can hear from Chair of Government Office. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Senator Perchlik, and thank you to the committee for having me. And I just wanted to go through and give you some kind of background on the parts of the bill that I'm guessing you'll be interested in since they deal either directly or tangentially with money. So if you have the bill in front of you, starting on page 2, there is updated language to current law that relates to auditing sheriff's departments. A number of years back, I think 10 to 15 years back, there were some issues with the financial management of sheriff's departments, particularly when a sheriff was leaving office and there was a transition between sheriffs. And so there were provisions included in the law at that time to oversee auditing of the sheriff's departments, and that's overseen by the state auditor. That issue has again sort of reared its ugly head with some practices that have happened recently that are concerning, and the auditor's office suggested the language changes that are in this bill related to auditing. So if you're curious about the specifics of why they recommended them, I definitely recommend having the deputy auditor in, and he can walk through in more detail. But that's where that language originated, because of inconsistencies or irregularities found in the audits, and wanting to really shore up, particularly during that change of office time when they've been seeing problems with potential misuse of funds or selling of property or things like that. So we heard from the auditor's office. We also heard from the side judges or assistant judges who actually are in some respects like a county executive and oversee the county budget. And so they also looked at this language as well.
Can I ask a quick question on that? I was going to ask to be recognized, but I forget I get to
do that now.
It is the side judges that decide basically the budget for the sheriff's office.
Not exactly. It's complicated, the sheriff's financing system, and you'll see later in the bill, one of the things that we have in our report back is some recommendations on how to improve the system. It's a combination of some state funding. For example, sheriffs are state funded employees, and some of the deputy sheriffs are as well. It's some county funding, and then it's some contract funding that they get from doing contracts with either private entities or local municipalities. So it's a combination, and it's one of the reasons why it's a little complicated.
Right.
Yeah.
But as far as like setting the salaries,
the salaries are set in statute, and then there's another provision that I'll discuss later that's related to the salaries. So that's the auditing provisions. And again, they were recommended by the auditor's office. The next part, starting on page, I think the audit stuff goes through quite a bit. Then there's some other non-finance stuff, financial stuff. And then starting on page 7, there's some language about contracts. And so this is language, this is language that you'll probably be hearing a lot about or have heard a lot about. Starting in 1991, the legislature put in a provision that allowed sheriffs to charge a 5% fee on top of their contracts that they could use pretty much at their discretion. and it was at the sheriff themselves discretion. So many sheriffs use this money to put back into their department, to buy things for their department. Others use it to increase their own personal salary. And this has become an issue, or it's the salaries of their deputies, and then the auditor in an audit this year found that one sheriff, I believe it was in Caledonia County, I believe, paid out more than $400,000 in salary bonuses to himself and his employees, and included even salaries to pay the taxes on those, which is really unheard of. So it was problematic, to say the least. So there's a real disparity in how this 5% is being used. So we heard testimony from the sheriffs.
That's not necessarily money that comes from the state or the county or the municipalities. It comes from contracts that they get working for private communities or towns, that 5%.
Well, I think most of their contracts are with municipalities, and then with the state itself. And so most of that funding would be actually public money that they've received through their contracts. They do have private contracts as well for private companies that they're doing security for, or things like that. But the majority of their contracts are with public entities, so it's public funding.
Does this bill do have any effect on those private contracts?
So this would still allow them to have a 5% an overhead fee, but we defined what they can use it for.
Even if it's daily free cash?
Even if it's, pardon me?
Well, in Bennington, the sheriff often leads daily precast bridges. These are bridges that are ready to be put on the bridge somewhere, usually out of state, and they're all made in Shasta.
Oh, precast. I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry. It's hard with that.
No, you're
Precast. So the sheriff, guides those out of Vermont. Then somebody else takes over when they get to the other border. And, they have, for example, you can't run those trucks when it's raining.
Yeah.
For example. So, but anyway, would this affect that contract with daily precast?
This is the 5% that they're allowed to charge on any contract. So they're public and they're private contracts. And what it does is it still allows them to do it. And it says the funds derived from contract, it allows an administrative overhead fee at a rate not to exceed 5% of the contract.
Right.
And that funds can be kept in a separate fund and used for expenses not covered by state or county funds, including the cost of vehicles, uniforms, equipment, training, and professional services.
Yeah,
and
but
that list,
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
Senator.
I'm referring to in section 5, 291A. It says a contract made with a town, city, village, or county.
Yeah.
It doesn't involve the state, so the state has contracts for transport. I know with Sheriff Anderson and Sheriff Markey do state contract. And then a contract under this section may contain and goes on. So, but I see nowhere here where other contracts are impacted. So in other words, the sheriff could still pocket 5% from daily precast, my example.
I guess I'm going to defer to legislative counsel when Tim comes up, but my understanding is that this would cover all their contracts and that they would only be able to use this for this list of things. And but I guess I will defer.
I think if I were a sheriff, I'd be arguing it only covers the city, village, and county, and maybe the state. The state's mentioned later on.
The the list that the bill says that they're allowed to use it for is a list that they provided to us in testimony of things that they need to use that 5% for. So that
I'm not arguing, I mean, I'm
directly-
a sponsor.
Yeah, no, I know, Dick, I'm sorry,
I'm just
Senator.
trying to figure out if we made an exception for those contracts that are made with private contractors.
We didn't intend to, it was supposed to cover all of their contracts, I believe the 5% has covered all of their contracts and that it would continue to.
We'll hear from Council Devlin when you're done.
Yeah, I gotta go, I'm sorry, Senator, that I can't fully answer your
No,
question.
that's fine.
The next section, section F, and you'll see that there are some things, this is not, as Tim will tell you, it's not totally, it doesn't have everything. There are the stars there, so there are things that come in between. But paragraph F on
What
the bottom
section?
of page 8.
What section?
Where does that-
It's section,
Yeah,
Page
I'm
Thank you.
five.
I'm looking at the.
section 5, section 5, page 8, paragraph F at the bottom. So as Senator Sears knows, there have been a number of years where it's been a concern that sheriff's departments have not been able to provide security services at county and state courthouses. There was a desire to create a statewide contract to make sure that all courthouses in the state had security coverage by sheriffs. So the Sheriff's Association and the judiciary worked together to come up with language that they both agreed on to put in this bill. So this paragraph F is their agreement to a point. So I do want to, one thing, starting on line 18, it does say the rate of pay is $51 per hour. That's what the sheriffs asked for in their rate of pay. And then the contract amount that was in fact in the immediately preceding year would be increased by the unadjusted percentage change in the CPI figure from the last reporting date. That language, starting with the contract amount that was in effect, that sentence that's starting on line 18, we asked the building general services what their standard language is if there's an inflator in their contracts, because there was an inflator in the agreement between the sheriffs and the judiciary, and it was a little, it didn't seem quite right. So we asked, what is the state general inflator? And this is what BGS gave to us as language, and they suggested it. So that's where that language came from. And that goes all the way through down to where it says the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's the BGS language. So the next financial part, there's some other things that are non-finance related or budget related. Then there's a task force report.
Senator Westman.
Oh, so sorry, Senator.
So, and I'm sorry I was late.
No, you're fine.
So, and I hear that you have to be
Yeah.
out of here.
That's okay.
So the funds derived from, backing up into, just above the, F, which on the paper copy is lines 9 through 12. And
Yeah.
it says the funds derived from contract administration overhead fees shall not be used for sheriffs, deputies, or other, departmental employees and compensation. So in those counties that are doing, transports, which is Memorial and Wyndham are doing the vast majority of the work for the state.
Mhm.
They can't bill off for any of the deputies or the sheriffs, any of the costs into this 5% for those functions.
The transport deputies are state funded deputies, so they wouldn't be affected by this at all. They are state employees and are.
As I understand it, that it's not always paid 100%. And so those deputies, because their budgets all become fungible, as I understand it, part of what goes into the cost of those deputies and the administration of that does come out of this 5%, at least in my county. And so, for those deputies,
Mhm.
my sheriff who has, and the sheriff in Wyndham, who have done the work of the state, and there is some administrative cost to that, are, in my case, what I think is in a different case than those counties that haven't done any. And they've expanded their, and they've done what the state is asking. And so to say to them, when they're doing specifically state work, no, you can't use any of this 5%, to me becomes quite problematic. They aren't in the same position as, and I understand that we've had some bad actors in this, and I don't want them.
Some is an understatement.
Yeah.
Senator.
What?
Some is an understatement.
Well, I would, you,
Although, I mean, I
from,
think the world of your sheriff as well as Sheriff Anderson. But some of the others,
Well, maybe let's just have Rudy
I'm
respond.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but where they're doing specific work, are we sure that this isn't putting those counties that have done the transports and done the work, are we absolutely sure how this is going to affect their budget in the area? I'm reluctant to not move ahead, and I don't disagree with you that some have been, but I come from a place where I think my sheriff's done a good job.
I totally agree with you, but it's probably have to. Some have not been reelected, thank God,
So,
but, or chose not to run, but it's probably half the sheriffs in the state who were involved in some kind of either illegal activity or other.
I don't disagree with that, but I'm saying in the places where they've done the work, and they're doing the work now, and
Well, let's have.
reimbursement is.
Yeah.
Respond to that, and I'll hand it back.
Thank you, Senator Perchliff, and thank you for the question.
Well, I do appreciate your filling in, Vice Chair. I could perhaps go out and enjoy the.
The one after
It's
that.
a nice day.
Well, I'm gonna quickly answer because I need to go back.
I know you do, and appreciate your coming in. Or maybe there's something that we can do to, I don't know, I don't know. We need to figure it out. I think the concern, at least as Rich was talking to me, or Senator West was talking to me earlier, is that somehow we not compromise the good there that is happening in some of the areas, or
Right.
the capacity that some of the funding gives to do those community benefits.
So what I will say is a couple things. One, sheriffs themselves are paid $94,400 in statute. That's a statutory salary and it's state funded. Transport deputies are also state funded deputies that have a state salary. They're part of the collective bargaining. They get all the state benefits. They are state employees. So their salary and their benefits are covered by state. This does not limit a sheriff's ability to have a contract to provide the services and to use that contract to pay for the salaries of deputies, or to even, pay for the administrative costs or anything that is related to that contract or for providing those services. All sheriffs would still be able to cover their costs with the contract. What this language says is that they can't use that 5% as what has been characterized as a slush fund. They can't just take that 5% and give themselves a bonus or give their deputies a bonus on top of their $94,000 salary, which is significantly more than the average salary in Vermont. So this is the only state employee in Vermont that is allowed to increase their own salary at their own will. And so this would just limit the use of the 5% to the things that they told us they need to use it for, which are cars, training, supplies, professional services, et cetera. So they would still be able to do all the things, the good work that your sheriff and other sheriffs that are doing good work are doing. They just wouldn't be able to pay themselves on top of what their salary already is.
I would just say that what you just answered my question. So you treat my sheriff who's doing the good work in exactly the same way that you're treating the sheriffs in the places that have been basically doing a lousy job, and you treat the sheriffs that have gone out and done the contracts and tell them you can do the work but don't get paid.
They can pay themselves through the contract. They can pay for the cost of the contract by doing the contract. And they get a salary from the state for being a sheriff.
And I think you'll find on the ground in the work that's being done, they have supplemented all of that with this 5%.
And you're talking about supplementing their wages. I guess we need to be clear. And, you know, the other question is the comparability of that wage with other law enforcement. Maybe some of this money has allowed that compensation that is what we have in statute. Did you look at that and it relates to other?
Yes, so the compensation for sheriff, there are sheriffs that have many years of experience, and then there are sheriffs who have almost no experience. And I mean, there's a sheriff in the room who has many years of experience, and he, by the way, was at the table with us nearly every time we met about this bill. And then there are sheriffs like my new sheriff who is 26 and barely has any experience. They get the same salary, and I think some people would argue that that's a problem. But it is also a problem to let them but give themselves bonuses, and then they decide how much they get. And some sheriffs are taking hundreds of thousands of dollars in bonuses, hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's what the auditor's office found. And some are taking none. And the sheriff from Wyndham has testified, for example, who also was at the table with us the whole time, that he never takes the bonus. He puts it all back into his department and invests in the public service work that he's doing for his county. So there's a real disparity in what the sheriffs are doing, and that's part of what we're trying to get at in the study at the end, is how do we look at those disparities and really make sure that there's a funding system that is ethical and fiscally responsible and fair to not only, well, most importantly, to Vermonters who are supposed to be served by these sheriff's departments.
So let me just ask, I see Senator Starr has a question, Senator Hardy, and that is in light of obviously the two people that have been there and testified have done yeoman service for the state, and they obviously have expressed their concerns. Do you think, and what would be the implications? Particularly, it's around the 5%. There are a whole lot of other things in this. Are we moving that ahead of the examination? I guess I'll ask your opinion on that. In other words, do we really need to look at how that 5%, should that be examined more in depth as part of the study, and then drive the decisions about how to approach it versus doing it now? I need to ask you.
Yeah, of course, it's a great question. I think that it's entirely appropriate what we did in the bill, largely because there is extensive evidence that this 5% has been abused by sheriffs. The $400,000 in bonuses by one sheriff, the repeated use of this for salary bonuses above and beyond what other comparable employees are making. And there's a concern also that if we put in statute that we're going to study this, but we're going to give you a year, that all the sheriffs will then inappropriately use the 5%, or many of them will. So there's evidence right now that it's being misused. So I think stopping that right now and then saying, how do we move forward, is appropriate.
And then lastly, I guess the sheriffs, I mean, our county government is kind of a unique structure.
Yeah.
And the extent to which our, we have county budgets, although most people don't realize it.
Yeah.
And is there a jurisdictional issue here in terms of these county level positions relative to what the state is? I guess you're saying, well, we set the salary, but I'm wondering if setting the salary needs to be part of this discussion as well, if in fact it has made the difference between getting compensation if you've got 25 years and you've been kind of out there doing really the things that the state needs to have done. It should have, I don't know, did you look at that or not?
Well, it's in the study for next year, is a look at this, the compensation of sheriffs as part of the study for next year.
I guess that's why I was wondering, should the two go together as opposed to sequentially?
Our committee didn't think so. We thought that we had heard enough evidence that 5% was causing inappropriate use of public funding, and as evidenced by multiple audits.
So Senator Starr,
Well,
we'll go to Senator Lyons.
Yeah, the first issue was the salaries of our county sheriffs. And it sounds like you like to use them like us. Everybody gets the same, whether you've been here 40 years or 4 months. Everybody gets the same pay. And that's a very unfair issue, even for the sheriffs. But we have a choice of whether we want to come back or not back, and we know what the rules are before we come. The other issue is the 5% issue. I would think that if I thought that I had an employee that I allowed, say, the truck drivers each to have 5% of their revenue that they bring in, they could use at their discretion. And I found that some of them were using that for increasing their pay. The first thing I would do is reprimand those that did do that. But I wouldn't do the whole 5% in on the whole crew. I would at least drop it down in notches, because I can see where a sheriff that's been at it for 20 years, he's getting $94,000, the same as whatever they got 20 years ago, and maybe they do need more money to survive on. And so I'm not in total agreement with doing away with the issue of the whole 5% at once. And the other issue, and we do that constantly here, we get the cart before the horse, we do the punishment, then we do the study, and then come back and figure out, well, the study showed this, but we did that last year, so now we got to change this. I would think that you would at least do some of the study first and then resolve the issue from what you find from the study, not do the bill and then do the study and have it backwards. So that's my own.
That's a comment.
No question, just.
I would just say one thing is that we have had studies, and those are audits, and the audits have shown that this funding is being used in a way to inappropriately provide bonuses.
Senator Lyons, I think Senator Hardy.
Yeah.
Body language suggests she's trying to
I'm
act.
happy.
The question is, right now, the use of that money is legal. So the $400,000 that he or she earned, that was legal. We're making an assumption, a value-based assumption, that that's an inappropriate use of the funds. So you're offering one solution and to change that. So,
Yep.
I mean, so the debate, I think Senator Starr has made a good point as well, and I don't know how many points you discussed in committee around all of this.
We discussed this kind of ad nauseum. And and along with all the other provisions in the bill, I mean, we took a lot of testimony. We heard from a lot of sheriffs. We heard from the Department of Sheriffs and State's Attorneys. We heard from the Attorney General's office. We heard from the Auditor's office. We heard from the Vermont Council on Justice, I can't remember the name, for Vermont Criminal Justice Council, that's it. From a number of,
Did you
yes.
look at what other states do?
The other states are all over the map.
All over
Some
the map.
states don't even have sheriffs, and some states have really very broad,
Yeah.
large, but most most states have much more extensive county government than we do. And so there's a lot more of a structure around. Ours are kind of in this really kind of netherworld, which is challenging for oversight reasons and for, authority, duties, et cetera. And they are constitutional officers, so we are really limited in what we can do. And that's one of the reasons we are working on a constitutional amendment at the same time, so that there's more that we can do for oversight.
I just would add that the sheriffs in other states usually have jails too,
Yeah.
which is a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
When we did away with the jails in Vermont, the county jails, it's had tremendous benefits, but it's also had some horrible side effects. One of which is that, the sheriff's job of running the county jail is no longer there. And that was a big source of the income. I suspect the 5% came, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect it probably came from the closure of the county jails as a way to
Compensate.
augment
Yeah.
and compensate the sheriffs.
I mean, we heard
It's
a lot
also giving them an opportunity. By and large, sheriffs are businesses
yes.
as well as local law enforcement. Your local police department doesn't usually have contracts with private companies. Sheriffs do.
I think Senator Hardy needs to exit.
Yeah,
by
I'm
the
sorry,
way.
but thank you for taking it up, and I'm happy to pop back over if you have more questions.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
for coming in.
Yeah, sure. Please stay.
So,
We were gonna hear from much council.
okay,
Well, maybe one question that came up in terms of the bill is the section that has to do with the 5%. The bill seems to indicate to me, as I read it, that it only affects city, village contracts, not private contracts
then why don't we,
that's why I wanted to.
let council maybe can help us.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Thank you very much for having me.
I don't think you've had the pleasure of our company before.
Not yet, no.
I hope you find it enjoyable.
Well, thank you very much. I'd be happy to speak to Senator Sears' question. The 5% provision does apply to all contracts. It is somewhat confusingly presented in the bill. In section 5, let's see here. Let me pull up the exemption. So what you can't see here in 24 VSA 291A are some of the other subsections, A and D, after. We had taken the opportunity to do some house cleaning with some of the language while we kind of had the proverbial hood up. And so B, there was usage of town, and current practices use the phrase town, city, village, or county. And B doesn't really have anything to do with C, which has been.
It's just clean up then.
It's just clean up. So those two shouldn't be read together. C really says a contract under the section, and then contracts under the section, subsection A, which is not provided here. It's omitted, just a drafting practice to save space and time, and typically to avoid confusion, so I apologize for introducing confusion. But A, all the contracts of the section really are written contracts with the state of Vermont, an agency of the US, one or more towns within or without the country, or any non-governmental entity. So it's really all contracts, that's 5%.
Is that the way you know?
Well, no, I just thought that they had, maybe this would be a way for the sheriffs to continue to get money that they could use at their discretion. For example, maybe Sheriff Marcoux does the actual contract work with daily precast and taking the bridge out of state, and could receive remuneration for that because he's getting paid. And that 5% could be used any way they want it. Those are for private contracts. The unusual thing about sheriffs, and the hard part I have, is they are businesses. They get elected to do two different types of things. And, you know, when you, in Massachusetts, you have to have a law enforcement officer every time you dig a hole in the ground. You know, and two of them usually. And it's a great thing for the local police, because they're getting overtime for standing there watching somebody dig a hole in the ground. Like, every time I go to Williamstown, there's two people digging a hole in the ground, and there's two police officers directing you traffic, and you know, but they're getting paid to do that.
Moral of your story is, do they have to be there when they fill the hole back in?
Absolutely.
I'm sure in Massachusetts.
Yeah, so I mean, that's private, but we don't allow our local police to do, as far as I know, we don't allow local police to do private contracts. So the sheriffs do that, and they do need, you know, law enforcement at various intersections or whatever.
Well, they also do, in small rural towns, that it makes no sense to have a police force. They actually provide that law enforcement protection. And in fact, one of the things we do, remember, is to put more money, I think it's in Essex County, in recognition that, well, no, it's because of Senator Luzzi, it's been around.
Oh, I thought it was the star money.
No, I know,
No,
no,
it's
you
Luzzi
can't,
money.
you can't give that credit to Senator Starr.
No,
But we could, so.
I
there's-
always thought it was star money.
But and the one thing that comes in is, here is, unlike the state police, they can't get new positions, they can't add, you know, they can't adjust their workforce. They have to get the permission, they have to get the positions created, they have to go through the legislative process, so it's a very much more constrained, and in terms of, you know, working or doing some of this work, whether it's escorting oversized equipment or providing, and I know in my area, I think there's some protection for the little towns of Reigate and whatever, which you can't have a police force. So there are things that make it somewhat unique, but much more ability to respond or scale to, if you can find the officers, that's of course the next thing. And then the other is the level of compensation, which I think is being laid out here, and the extent to which, in fact, you know, it sounds like, depending on, if you look at that salary that we have in statute relative to other law enforcement
State
positions,
police.
doesn't seem to be competitive. And so some of this income allows the sheriff's offices to have the resources to be a bit more competitive. So, so can you just restate again, what are the limitations on the 5%? You can, not covered by state or county funds. Is that on, and that is section 5?
Yes,
Okay,
the relevant language will appear on page 8,
yeah, okay.
line 5. Funds derived from contract administrative overhead fees shall, kept in a separate account, skip forward a little bit, and used by the sheriff's department only for the costs of necessary departmental expenses not covered by state or county funds, including, of course, including but not limited to, the cost of vehicles, uniforms, equipment, training, and professional services. And then there is the follow-up language, which the committees are touched upon, but
So you can't use them for compensation.
the next sentence explicitly prohibits that, yes.
See, and that's not right.
That's the 5, from the overhead, from the 5%. Now, let me ask, when you're doing these contracts, then now would this not just build in more cost to the contractor?
That was going to be my question. Do we know if the committee went into, as I understand it, in domestic violence cases, we, in counties like mine, in a few others, they've used this money to support in domestic violent cases, what the deputies have to do, and and it's intermittent how that gets used. And if we have to come back and we have to now look at DCF's budget and say, we aren't paying enough in contracts from DCF to pay for what the deputies are doing, and that's all gonna reverberate out into their budgets. And in domestic violence cases, it's now gonna
I think you find
reverberate.
it's child sexual abuse and not domestic violence.
Well, I've been told it was domestic violence.
Well, it may be, but I know in Orange County, for example, the sheriff's department is the one that contract with the
So,
child sexual abuse, which is the same point.
which is the same point, but I don't know how this is gonna reverberate out into their budgets now.
Well, let me
And what
ask,
they're going to do.
normally it'll pop out somewhere else. So if you can't use the 5% for this purpose, what you're talking about paying, then what you're gonna do is not pay for it out of the 5%. Your contract is going to reflect the costs. And the amount of income would still be generated. It's just, you put the 5% offline.
So I'm gonna go for a year and who's gonna cover that cost in those budgets?
Well,
Jane,
And should that be part of the study?
well,
Jane's figuring like I was figuring.
yeah, the raincoat's in here, you find it. It's kind of the question that I have.
The fundamental question though for me is, should a sheriff be able to make double the salary using the 5% with contracts and make $180,000 a year?
Well, Senator Perch,
I mean, that's the sort of thing that happens.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm concerned about that. But there is some ability to move the money around, like it's gonna come up somewhere, except they just can't, because my understanding of how they're compensated, they couldn't just add it to their compensation. They could, to the sheriff at least, I don't know about the deputies, like if they have a contract, they could put the contract to a higher hourly rate and maybe pass that through.
mhm.
But my understanding is they couldn't pass that through to their salary, but I could be wrong, I don't know.
are they, and that's what they're doing now, is they're passing it through? to
Just the
this?
5%.
Well,
It's only on.
I don't know
the
what
contract.
each one's doing, but you've got,
But my point is, if you could say, all right, if the 5%'s not off, then I'll just generate an equivalent amount of income to
Right.
support my operation, but except with the state operated contracts, you can't, they're
except
set.
they're saying you can still charge the 5%, you just can't use it for salary.
But I don't,
Bonuses.
I don't really see where it's any of our business on private contracts. On county or town or city contracts, they're using public money there, but for private contracts, why are we sticking our nose into that end of
You
it?
mean like when they're doing it for
For
heavy equipment or bridge?
Or safety, security.
I thought the same thing, Senator Starr, but what was pointed out to me, and I wasn't in the committee, so I didn't hear the testimony from the sheriffs, is that if they have a private contract that they can use the 5% for, then they might not take the other contracts. So they're saying like, hey, I can get paid a lot more doing the precast concrete contract. So the sexual abuse case or the court, they're only giving me $42 an hour. I'm just gonna say I don't have any deputies, so sorry, I can't show up. Or the town of Rygate, I'll just say, sorry, Rygate, we can't show up
Well,
because
the state
The
also
court-
wants to have the governor here, and they can't do it because he can't get deputy sheriffs to.
the
they're gonna make
courts
more money.
issue that's in this bill right here.
Right.
That's a $200,000 a year deal, you know.
$51. Yeah, I'm just saying that's,
Oh, well, that's coming out, that's coming out, the increase to 51, it's not that,
We can't agree to that here.
that's gotta come out. The only thing we can agree to is their statewide contract. But the $51 is additional, because the budget has 47,
See,
and it's on the wish list of the judiciary. So we won't have this bill at a minimum carry that appropriation.
That's
That would be out. It's something we would have to consider as part of the overall 24 budget. I guess the question becomes one of, of, the extent to which we're revisiting, or as Tim would say, relitigating some of these issues. On the other hand, if in fact it's going to have a collateral financial impact somewhere else along the line, then that puts a different dimension on it, other than just, we don't want the sheriffs to enrich themselves.
Sheriff Martin?
What?
Could we hear from Sheriff?
We normally don't, but since we do have the sheriff here, we can, I think this is the whole controversy here. The money part, we're just gonna pull out on the $51 per hour and the guarantee of a CPI. Everybody would like that guarantee.
Is the only other appropriation in there for the committee, like just per diems?
Yeah, and was there anything, I think it was just the per diems, there wasn't any study, the study. Does that-
Study doesn't have a cost.
The
Study have a-
It's got $1,000.
Just 1,000 for per diem, so, the $51 is per hour, those are the financial, budgetary pieces. Anything more before we,
Sorry, could I have you just repeat the item regarding $51?
yes, so that, we're going to, amend that section, on page 8, and it will have, that there'll be a single statewide contract, of pay for such services over courthouse security, and end it there. We're not gonna indicate in the bill that we're gonna pay a certain amount per hour, or that we are committed to guaranteeing an increase here, because we don't do it for any place else.
So to confirm, lines 14, halfway through 17, that would remain, and then picking up
The rest goes.
through 5 on the next
Yeah.
page would be, okay. Gotcha.
And we can keep the 1,000 kind of de minimis. Yeah.
It's the word of the week.
Yes, I liked it. It's right up there with space and onboarding. And a few other things. All right, thank you very much for being, so,
Well, to me,
Sheriff Marcoux, if you want to come up and tell us where you might be solving one problem and creating another.
Thank you, Roger Marcoux from Oil County Sheriff. So can I offer,
Yes, you can, anyone can offer testimony.
first of all, between the media and others that make the claim sheriffs are enriching themselves, what I've given the chair is what other law enforcement officials in Vermont are making. And I think that maybe people are unaware of that. So, and I'll use me as an example. When we had COVID and there was a need to have security at motels, because that was the only way the motels would cooperate with us, we did that, and some other sheriff's departments did, and we did that. And I think that Senator Sears and I have talked a lot in the last several years that we've known each other, and when there's been a need for the state, their sheriff's departments that step up. So to bring me as an example down to the level of a rookie in terms of compensation, what is the incentive for me to take any contracts at all other than what I'm mandated to do? I've been sued, I think, four, maybe 5 times in the 22 years that I've been sheriff, and that's very good for law enforcement, but it still takes a tremendous toll on me and my family. So if you look at comparable wages that other law enforcement is making in the state, then I think this rhetoric put out there by some newspapers about us enriching ourselves, it's not really out of line. Some of the things that I had tried to discuss with the Senate of Ops is perhaps putting a cap on how much the sheriff could make out of that 5%. If you allow the 5% to continue capped, then that means the potential study where human resources might say, geez, Roger's been here 22 years, he needs to be up at this level, close to the executive level of the Montana Police or the MV or somebody like that. That money's going to come out of the state budget, as opposed to if we're allowed to use the 5%, then the harder a sheriff works, if that 5% is capped, if that 5% is capped, then you know, if they're a hardworking sheriff, then they can make more money, comparable but not over what is existing in the current state law enforcement.
So that would be a collateral impact. If we were to equalize salary to what we're paying in state government for the sheriff, for law enforcement, that would fall to the general fund,
That's right.
which right now is being funded through this other mechanism in terms of the 5%.
So there are departments that are
Let me ask you, could you do the same thing? So you have a contract with these other entities in private. Could you just simply say, I'm going to charge them a little bit more, and that isn't my administrative overhead, that's just my fee, and therefore this law wouldn't apply? Do
probably
you see that happening?
it could, and counties around interstates get a lot more private. I have to go, since I don't have an interstate, I tend to do what I can to work with the state. We have municipal contracts where we are the police department for several towns, and we have a regional dispatch center that's been in existence for 45 years. So in my county, for example, I don't have that much opportunity for private contracts. And I think, Senators, to your point, that Senator Sears gets this very well, is that if people are going to go where the money is, and if private contracts is where they can make money to compensate their salary, then they're not going to do those mental health transports, those DCF transports in court security. I'm down here in Washington County covering court security out of Lamoille County. That shouldn't be the case. But so we need to really look at those unintended consequences. Because I've seen quite a lot in my 22 years. And I have to say, for the record, the sheriffs have done this for ourselves in this position. I admit that, I don't like it, and I'd like to seize this opportunity to actually make a change that's going to address some of the issues, not hurt everybody.
So what you're talking about is making it more transparent then. Right now, people are, in terms of, or if you did what you were proposing, some kind of a cap or something.
A cap, there has to be guardrails, there has to be training. We've got 8 new sheriffs. They don't understand Title 24. We've got some older sheriffs that have left, and I've heard that they should have been, when the sheriff-elect was elected in November, then all checks should have been countersigned by the side judges, and that hasn't happened. It's not necessarily because everybody's a crook. There is absolutely no training.
So to Senator Kitchell's question, I don't know if I heard the answer. So if you were to live, like you're paying yourself a little more, you're just the generic sheriff, I'm not talking about you specifically, with the 5% to kind of get your wages within the market rate, but then we change that. Could you raise your salary through increasing the hourly wage to your contracts? Or are you not allowed to do that by?
I'm not saying that we're allowed to do that.
You could do it you could buy a nicer car or get new equipment, because that's allowed, but there wouldn't be any way to raise the salary just because the statute just prohibits it. Right now,
Out
the
of the
only way to
5%, out of the 5%, you could pay this higher salary out of the
I don't think so.
95% of the contract.
Not for the sheriff, at least.
There have been sheriffs that have worked extra duty and taken whatever the statute says that you can't charge a per hour rate more than what's comparable to the department. So there have been sheriffs to do that, but I manage $3.5–4 million worth of contracts, then I have to be at my desk. So I can't be out working traditionally. And, I've thought about this every which way, and that's really what that administrative fee is for, is that I'm doing administration, and I'm taking on the liability of everything that I do.
I think you'd probably be able to do it maybe for the employees by raising the rate to the contract, but not.
Not
I
yourself.
have thought of that, and that's gonna be a cost shift right back to
That's
that. Yeah.
And with the state contracts, all that would be is a chip,
Raise it $52.
something like that.
So-
Center Star.
I was wondering, when you talk about the cap, Roger, what the cap on the 5%, only a certain amount would be able to be used for salary enhancements, or a cap that only X number of dollars could be spent out of the total 5% for salaries?
That was the form.
How would you cap it?
Well, one thing we could do is talk to the Department of Human Resources to see where sheriffs could be. And then, if it's $150,000, that is the cap. And you're subject to audits to see, make sure that you keep it within that. I'm the highest paid sheriff, there's no doubt about it. And I've been doing this 42 years, and I used to be embarrassed about that, but I'm not. I've seen what the state is making. And you all know, those of you that know me, know that I'm working. So if we want to somehow get out of this rut that we're in with sheriffs, we don't have the very, very best candidates available if we're not paying. And we need to do something with training. We either need to get rid of sheriffs or invest in them, the way I see it. And I think that there is value to the communities and to the state to have sheriffs healthy. And I think if you talk to Commissioner Morrison or Colonel Birmingham, it's going to tell you, no, we need them to do the things we can't do. But as I said, there's no incentive. $94,000 is better than a lot of our citizens make. I admit that. But I'm a professional. I have 40 people that carry guns, and I still get called out at night. And so it's a serious business. And I think that it's comparable. We should be able to compete, so to speak, with what other law
Well, if
enforcement.
this happened to you, and then your compensation fell back to what it is in the statute, I would think you would say, I'm out of here.
It's difficult to, and again, we do it to ourselves, and I don't blame anybody else, but it's difficult year after year to come and be on the defensive about something others did when we don't have a chance, we don't have an opportunity, a way to fix it. You can't help who is elected in a position. We're all in that position. But what we
Yeah,
can
we see
do,
that every 2 years.
but what we can do is we can create statutes where it's mandatory for new people coming in to, there's certain training that's available out there.
Does this bill require it?
It's
This,
this,
the report could come back and recommend. That's
yeah, and I would hope there's only one sheriff in that community, or whatever it's gonna be. I mean, there needs to be some people, more than one person, that knows the ins and outs of, well, yeah, we could do this, we can't do that, this is why we can't do this. But it comes to a point really where, does the legislature want sheriffs to exist this way or that way? If it's like Connecticut, where they're marshals now, they're not even sheriffs anymore. They just want them to transport prisoners in court security, if that goes through, and serve civil process, then that's not for me. I'm a law enforcement professional. However, if that's what the legislature wants, then that's too bad for me. I've got to look for a different job. But if you want us to do some other things, then we need to invest in the sheriff's.
I think those numbers you handed out though include health insurance, retirement, and other taxes.
I don't, yeah.
They're not actually the salary of the colonel.
Right, so that's probably,
So we should probably be looking at your
2/3, no, my mind's-
94,000 plus the retirement.
Yeah,
plus other benefits.
I think I put that towards the tail end of the, I
I
think,
like what the PSOP should get.
166.
That's the total.
Senator Sears, I did do that work and it's not on this, but sheriffs are around with total compensation using this apples to apples is around 147. So
With that, so that's what they're using the 5% to get from the statutory 95 up to
no,
147.
that's the base, so that's the 94
That'd
plus.
be with their health
With their benefits, health
their
insurance,
retirement.
retirement.
You get retirement.
So it's usually about 35%.
Yeah, group got.
Well, it depends on what group you're in. You can get hammered because we've increased pay debt quite a bit.
Here,
You need your
Well,
5% to pay your rate.
do you get the 20-year deal? That's what we
We've been
get
working on that for years and
as legislators. We get
He's
full
he's waiting for his
retirement.
retirement.
Yeah, well, it's like
I
waiting for
wasn't
Godot.
happy, so I wanna double it.
Other questions of Sheriff Markku?
Well,
Thank you.
I mean, what would you suggest?
His suggestion was to look at some kind of cap, because I think,
Handicap and education.
well, the education, I think, might be included in the study. You said something about that.
I don't know, I'll have to review that.
I think you said maybe you needed more than one representative, since it's about your whole profession.
Yes.
And the other was to allow the 5% to flow, but the extent to which that can happen would be capped out at a.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One other thing I'd just like to mention about this bill is the piece where the sheriffs are to help domestic violence victims retrieve their possessions, but sheriffs cannot charge for them. So we can't pay for those deputies to come out now out of 5% anymore either. So we have a bit of a contradiction there. And I don't know how to fix that, but I wanted to point it out.
So you can get called out to go do a job and no compensation?
For domestic violence victims, and we do that as a practice in Memorial anyways.
But somebody was charging the victim. Wasn't that the issue?
That's what I heard.
I understood, I thought that there was a fund in the domestic violence network that would pay the officers or the deputies to come out, but I'm not sure.
But you haven't used it because you've used the other funding.
Well, what we do is if it happens in our primary law enforcement area of responsibility, 24/7, where like Art Johnson and Wolcott, then we go do it as part of what we do, which I believe, in my opinion, that municipalities and the state police, a lot of, hey, if it's in your area, go do it. If it's outside of our area and we're mandated to do it, then I have to hire usually 2 deputies because they're volatile situations to make sure that that victim is safe. I have to get the money somewhere to hire those 2 people to go be with that victim.
So
Well,
that should be part of, out of that 5%, or how else do you earn money?
Right, so.
oh, well, I guess you could add what's a permissible use.
It limits.
It says, only for costs necessary, departmental expenses not covered by state or county funds. So conceivably.
But it limits us to vehicle,
Section 5.
uniforms, equipment.
Oh, and then the
training.
last sentence says, shall only be used.
Maybe add that in.
It's, I think in a study, it would be interesting because I think that we've been piled on here a little bit by the auditor's office too. I did some quick checking this morning in Caledonia County. And those deputies up there, according to the new sheriff, they get a raise or anything during all of COVID and everything. So $400,000 sounds like a lot, but not really when you spread it between 20 deputies. If that came out of the 5%, and if the sheriff's, he paid himself $20,000, people call it a bonus. But if that was part of the 5%, that's the salary. So I myself wait until the end of the year to see how my department's doing before I gauge how much money I'm going to take. And, you know, this.
Other questions? Sure. Guess we'll have to have more discussion about the extent to which we want to maybe address at least the compensation issue.
Well, I'd like to see that. I think that cap's a good idea to cap it out so they aren't gonna give away, you know, $2 million or something because they're getting out of here, because I'm not gonna work for 94 grand anymore, and I'm gonna spend all the money before I leave. And so if that cap got in there, that would certainly help it, but I certainly don't agree with what they've got written in the bill without that. And Roger's not my sheriff, even though his officers.
Roger is my
visit
sheriff.
once
And I will say, if you're doing more public work, and it's legitimate work, not just willy-nilly bonuses, if you're doing legitimate work, you're doing mental health contracts, you're doing DCF contracts, we don't want to discourage that.
And also, we know that we cross-subsidize all over the place, and it sounds to me like this is an element of that cross-subsidy that
And
may
if you're
occur.
gonna get rid of it, we better know what we're doing.
Or we look at some kind of upward parameters so that that there's, it's not just how much you can, I mean, it's sort of, it's hard when you're the boss and you're the determiner who gets how much and how much I get, you know, that there's a certain maybe conflict there, but you do have your side judges, but how they see their job is all over the map, as you will.
May I just say one other thing? With respect to salary adjustments, we all know how competitive it is right now trying to find help. We're competing with municipalities, with unions. And we've never been able to crack that nut where we're competitive with the retirement.
Oh, I know.
The ability to,
That's only true for certain offices, though.
right, the ability to be able to use the salary adjustment for an employee so that they can put it in a supplemental retirement is a huge thing. And I would have to say, boy, if we're gonna fix one thing, allow us in a fair way, in a transparent way, to give those employees compensation and some kind of supplemental retirement. I'd say that'll take priority over my salary or the sheriff's salary, is to make those folks whole.
Okay, thank you. So I guess the question is, we're going to remove that section, which is given the extent to which it does tie into, obviously, state compensation and comparability and equity of pay. The extent to which we want to consider kind of ability to not create kind of that fiscal disincentive that occur for particularly people in senior experience, and how that might work. And Senator Sears, I don't know what your thinking is. I mean, you were one of the lead sponsors of this bill in terms of how we might.
Well, we did, in the bill as introduced, we did away with 5% completely. So I think I'm supportive of the Government Operations Committee position. even though I've heard the testimony. But if it's a compromise you're looking for, then I would say the compromise is a cap on how much can be used for personnel expenses, but not for bonuses. Clearly pointing out that, you can't just give somebody a $30,000 bonus. Or there was one guy who received $1,200 in pay for the whole year and got like a $30,000 bonus. Or I may be making those numbers up, but I mean, it was just outrageous. So I think, that was what really I think government operations was looking at, with some of the outrageous stuff that's happening. So if you developed a cap of 2% for salaries, something of that nature, that I could live with that as a compromise. But I think you still have to have some guardrails.
Transparency or some guard upper.
Yeah, I think you have to have transparency, as Sheriff Martin mentioned.
Would you do it as a cap in 5% or a cap on the percentage of the underlying pay of the sheriff or?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I think the recommendation was to have the cap on how much, just like, all other administrators here, you can earn so much, you're not adding onto it, like if you're a commissioner or whatever, it's, so if we put an uppermost cap on and made it look at comparability within the state system, that might go a ways. And I think that was maybe in essence what we were hearing in testimony, so that the sky's not the limit, so to speak, and that you're not going to, as a sheriff, get in a position where you can get $300,000 or $400,000 a year versus, the other law enforcement. So I think that it might be easier to say what that upper limit is on compensation.
Well, but I thought you might use,
well, you could
for
use,
example, would it be preventing the sheriff setting up a IRA that the sheriff contributes to, and or Roth or whatever those retirement benefits are? I'm thinking about the deputies who don't have any retirement. So if the sheriff out of say you got a 2% limit on, could be used for salary and benefits,
so we
then
expand
he
the
could
use.
provide, a retirement plan that he contributes to and that the employee contributes to. A lot of private employers do that. They could also do a health insurance plan that's contributed to. If you include in benefits, as long as everything's transparent.
2% of the 5 or 2.5.
I'm just throwing, I would do nothing, okay? But I'm hearing the committee, and as a sponsor of the bill, they had nothing in there. For the 5%, not even allowed the 5%. I'm just, offering to get a compromise that the committee could live with, that government operations might be able to live with. I don't want to see a battle on the floor.
I don't either.
Well, I thought it was 2 or 2.5.
I don't know what the number is, but I'm just saying,
Well, why don't we try to,
it could be used for benefits or salary, and
I totally agree. There shouldn't be really bonuses, and that we got to get rid of.
and we could do that, and as well as give some flexibility on up to 2% or something up to 5%.
Yeah.
But then the other question is to deal with the optics of the sheriffs being able to authorize bonuses for themselves that seem to be very generous, to have something that caps annual compensation using a method that I think Sheriff Marcoux was talking about. Maybe that's a good way of getting some comfort here.
And I think we'd also want to sunset it. But we could also suggest to the committee that they add training to the report that isn't in there. But we could say, okay, so that there isn't a cliff, because if professionals are working. Yeah, that's right. He got us that one change. But if, I can see the point that if, like the Weston's point about, penalizing the good for the actions of the bad, if they have been working hard and been kind of on a salary, it seems like some of the worst offenders didn't get reelected, but say like, oh, for this transition period, till we get the study on compensation, that not penalizing them, saying like, there's a cap on total compensation, and maybe working on what they can do with the deputies if they're already providing that, or trying to hire new deputies, because that's the problem. I could see that being a compromise, but I would just sunset it and then have to, because that gives the report something to figure out.
Sunset what?
That using the 5% of the wages. So we could say for this transition time, so they're not getting, let's say they're, because of the 5%, they were getting 140,000, and then next year they have to go back to 95. That's a pretty big pay cut for no fault of their own. So we're saying keep them whole for that year. And
I think the thought is behind that, not get out in front of the study. Let the study do its work, and come back with recommendations, and not prejudge what might be there before we get there.
we're agreeing with the committee that something needs to be changed, but we want to
How that
pull the
might.
rug out from under.
I'm just wondering whether
Thank you,
we
Peggy.
actually, it's the sunset that I'm finding
Yeah, I
a little
wouldn't,
hard to
I
understand.
wouldn't put a
I mean, if in
sunset.
fact what we're gonna do is cap the total compensation, and, I frankly, we could look at a comparable position within state government, and align it with that.
The natural one would be the commissioner of public safety in that sense.
Well, that's a
That's
much
a little
larger.
high.
That's a little high.
Well,
I don't know what Colonel Birmingham, but he's in the force, 300 and something, I think is the state police. So sheriff's offices don't have that statewide responsibility. We will have to look at what we think might be comparable. And, but if you're gonna say we can use some for benefits, and frankly, I know in Windham County, they got hit with that higher ADEC because of our underfunding thing. And they actually had to go to a county budget for $80,000 because they hadn't calculated in the cost. So that's, the other problem here. Well,
That's another county, good sheriff
Good
now,
sheriff.
but they had their problems. Several years ago, you had one of the sheriffs under, I think that was convicted.
okay.
Well, that.
Perhaps we could just go, maybe a couple could just go offline and we can maybe do some drafts, think about how we might draft something up to bring back for consideration. Do that. Because we have a segue into Defender General's office at this, within 6 or 7 minutes. Are a committee happy with, in other words, taking what we've done? In other words, that we might expand a little bit for some of the funding they use to support benefits. And the one I'm worried about is this, is the pensions, the ADAC, because those of you who are in Group F and you're one, and Sheriff Anderson's one, and those kinds of hits, if you haven't got any kind of capability, and then we can add the training to the study and look at putting some kind of cap on total compensation and pegging it to some position, and that would move upward as that position moves upward in state government, as part of the.
Could we get some administrative training added to?
Yeah, the training would go into the study,
Specific.
into the study to look at specific training necessary. All right, why don't we try to get something drafted up to reflect our discussion, and we'll take it from there. We should take a brief
5
break,
minutes.
because we have no break, as you can
That would
see.
be good. I got